All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the show. My name is Jim Kantowski, and I am joined by my colleague, Jake Sadler. And we are Conversations with Curio. And today we are going to talk about the topic of spending in retirement, as Jake titles it, Permission to Spend.
In air
Jake?
quotes only, right?
Air quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Permission to spend. Yeah. Permission to spend in retirement.
Why are we talking about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, because it can be difficult. That's the long and short of it. It can be hard to spend in retirement for a lot of different reasons. The most common ones, that we tend to see are that you get to retirement and you've done a great job saving over the years. You've been in that accumulation mindset, and you get to retirement, paycheck stops, and it starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable. It can be pretty scary, honestly, to start taking money out of what you've saved, to
Yeah,
start
no
spending
doubt.
it down.
We're talking about this because we see it all the time. Spending in retirement is one of the most challenging things to do. And to your point, you've been accumulating all your whole life. You've been using this sort of salary that is, in a way, fixed or guaranteed that comes in most cases. And so you've had this resource, and now you're flipping that it's on its head, and you're changing your tone to live off some sort of assets that there's a little unknown around. As much as we plan and we build portfolios and all those things, there's some call it volatility and some unknowns surrounding those assets. So it puts a lot of fear into people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. There's a lot of uncertainty as you head into retirement. And, just that question, is my money going to last my lifetime? Um, that question keeps a lot of folks up at night.
It does. And, it's hard to say, like, are people giving up desires or things they want to do because of this fear? And if they are, it's really hard to in a lot of cases. I don't want to use the word justify. I don't really know what the right word is, but you get one life to live, and
Yeah.
you're worried that you're going to run out of money, which may or may not happen. And there's just so many unknowns there. People tend to stay away from spending and enjoying and just accept what they have, which may be okay.
Yeah, that can certainly be okay. I mean, for most people, that is priority number one, is not running out of money during their lifetime. And so anything that, you do that helps you towards that goal, that can feel good. So spending less as a result can ultimately feel good for a lot of folks because it serves priority number one, which is not running out of money. And I think as you kind of start to peel back the layers of the onion a little bit, then I think you get into that. Maybe is there more that I want to do with what I have? And it can be hard to ask that question: can I do more with what I have? Because there's that fear that if I ask that question and then do something, it goes against priority number one.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So what we came up today was a list of items or strategies that you can put into place to ensure that you can make these decisions and we'll just say live the life you want to live, uh, or not make assumptions about your financial future. And so the list is, we're going to want to start with, like, sort of know the life you want to live. That's number
Yeah.
one. And we're going to talk about these once we go through it. But you want to know the life you want to live, and that's identifying your goals and what you like to spend money on. And then you're going to want to know your current financial picture. You're going to want to have a budget in place. You're going to want to know that you have the right portfolio for you, and you're going to want to manage your taxes appropriately. And then the last one is you're going to want to have some flexibility. And so if we just step back and we talk about each one of those and give a little perspective of what they mean, I think it might be helpful to some people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, that's the list right there. It really covers, the majority of the waterfront. You think about that permission to spend, allowing yourself to spend in retirement.
So, what do you think about knowing your current financial picture? What does somebody need to know in order to truly understand their current financial picture?
Yeah. Well, we're probably going to touch on some of the other things that are in our list, but um,
Let's stick to assets.
kind of okay. All right. So knowing our current financial picture, right? So we
Yeah.
need to know the balance sheet, right? We need to know everything we own, and we need to know everything that we owe, and we also need to know kind of the moving pieces. We also need to know what money's coming in. We need to know, do we have sources of guaranteed income that are coming in, pension, Social Security if we're in retirement. We need to know what other sources of income we need to rely on. Whether that's from the portfolio or if we have investment properties, that sort of thing. So you've got the balance sheet, and then you've got cash flow essentially.
Income sources. So the balance sheet looks like cash accounts, investment portfolios, retirement accounts, real estate properties. Maybe rental real estate properties, or even your own
Yeah.
current rental property. Those are sort of the major or main, we'll call them, assets or resources that would go to funding your retirement. And then, as you mentioned, then you want to know exactly what those streams of income that you're going to be able to receive during retirement. So that might be a pension, that might be a Social Security benefit. I don't know if there's really any other streams of income or something tied to a rental property that you might.
Annuity. Yeah, you could have an annuity. Yeah.
Annuity. Yeah, annuity is a good one. Yeah. And
And
we
I mean,
think about that. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just add a couple other things on it, not the balance sheet, but other things that are really important to have an understanding of and knowing your current financial situation in retirement specifically. You need to have a really clear sense of what risks you have managed through insurance, and you also need to have a really clear sense of how your assets will be distributed beyond your lifetime. So think of for a surviving spouse or for your heirs. So I think those two areas are also extremely important to have a clear
So I
sense
was
of.
about to scold you. I thought you were going to go on to different like topics of that down the list before you were supposed to, but
No, this is
you actually,
know your financial picture.
yeah, but you brought up actually two amazing points. Knowing your financial picture is um, your risk management. Absolutely. And I could go down a path with this, but if you have an income source or you and your spouse both have Social Securities and one of you passes away, you lose one of those Social Securities. So you might need some insurance to replace this, or just flat out know that that is going to go
Yeah,
away. Or you might have a pension that doesn't have a survivor benefit on it. Those are really, really good points in terms of knowing your full financial picture, not only what you currently have, but how it might change if something happens to one person assuming there's two people in a relationship in the picture. You might want to know what happens. Really,
yeah,
really great
yeah.
points. So,
No
so
scolding.
that's what's that?
No scolding needed.
Yeah, no scolding needed. I'm sorry, I made an assumption you're going to go down the wrong path. So that's my fault. I'll take full responsibility for that. So the next one, which ties into this, which really I think is one of the biggest factors in your ability to spend in retirement, in order to have a successful retirement, is knowing that spending number. And I know that one's important to you also.
Yeah, I mean, this, you think about the idea, we're talking about permission to spend. And the way that I tend to think about it is it's, if I'm going to think about spending more, well, more is a relative term. It's relative to what you're already spending. So you have to have that clear sense of what you're already spending. And the assumption is, right, with if you're on a trajectory for a successful retirement, you've identified the life that you want to live, you know your financial picture, your your budget is presumably aligned with your resources, and based on that level of spending, your money's going to stand the test of time. So if you start adding on expenses above and beyond that base number, that's when the kind of uncertainty starts to build. You really start to question, well, that old number that worked well. What about this new number? Does this jeopardize priority number one of not running out of money? So you gotta know what you're currently spending before you can consider additional spending.
And we started out there with sort of having this baseline budget and then wanting to spend more. A lot of people assume they have to spend the least amount of possible in order for their money to last. At
Mhm.
least that's what I run into. They're just people make this assumption like, hey, I can't spend that because it's going to affect me one day, or I can't spend that because I have to pay for health insurance. But that's not always the case, especially when we see it from our perspective. There's a lot of people that sit down in front of us that have no chance of running out of money, and it's really hard to get across to them that that is the case, and they just have this fear of spending that we talked about earlier. Do you see that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, kind of first, what I was describing at first, that's really for folks in retirement that are thinking about spending more than they're currently spending. But what you're describing is really that fear and anxiety that can come with just spending what you need to spend to live that comfortable retirement that you've defined for yourself. And, it can take for some folks kind of got to give yourself that permission to spend that amount year over year. You got to make sure that this number fits this year again. And so just kind of allowing yourself the confidence, giving yourself the confidence that you need to spend just that base number can also be really important.
And one of the ways you can give that yourself that confidence to spend is to have a portfolio that's aligned with your objectives. How do you think
Yep.
about creating a portfolio for someone when they are entering into that retirement phase of your life?
Yeah, that's a really central question. And the portfolio that got you to retirement might not be the right portfolio to get you through retirement. And it all stems from how much do you need to take from what you've saved. And really that's where we start. When we're looking at designing a portfolio for someone as they're entering into retirement, the first question is really how much income are you going to need from the portfolio each year? And that's a question that sometimes we have to help unpack and take a close look at. But that number is really driving that kind of first decision in the overall mix of, say, stocks and bonds in the portfolio to make sure there's a healthy balance of investments to give you that sustainable income that you need year over year.
Right. So there's creating a portfolio that will drive that income source, and you have to make sure they're tied together. But there's also something else in terms of risk that we have to consider. Managing the risk of the portfolio so that we don't make any unnecessary changes to the portfolio that could potentially jeopardize, our ability to retire. Like we don't want to walk into retirement with a highly aggressive portfolio, sort of be right there on the borderline in terms of spending, have a market decline, and then all of a sudden we're in this situation where we got to go back to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is an unacceptable outcome right there. So the portfolio that you have, it has to meet those objectives, and you really kind of have to, in designing that portfolio for retirement, give yourself what we sometimes call a margin of safety. So you think about the income coming off the portfolio, you give yourself some wiggle room, right? The last thing that you want is to have to sell investments in your portfolio that are down in value to get the income that you need. And the more aggressive your portfolio is, the more likely that outcome is to occur.
Yeah, and I think about that really in two terms. It's sort of your need to take risk. How much do you need to generate from your portfolio to have a successful,
Yeah.
outcome, and then it's your ability to take risk. How much can you withstand in terms of volatility? And the other place where that ability comes in is, what's your spending number in relation to your total assets? If you're spending a small amount and you have a lot of assets, you have the ability to take more risk because you can withstand market downturns. And in that case, you might not be worried about spending. You might be wanting to provide as much as possible to your future generations or your heirs.
Yeah, I mean, getting the mix right is critical.
All right. So we talked about having the portfolio, and the other thing that comes up in all our conversations is taxes. And if we think about taxes in terms of that income number or those large spending numbers, that can play a really big factor in our spending number. There's a cost.
Yeah, no, I mean, you take money out of the portfolio in retirement, there's going to be a tax implication one way or another. So it's really important to have a clear sense of the tax impact of taking money out of the portfolio, whether it's for what you need on a year over year basis, or if your spouse says, let's take that once in a lifetime trip, it's going to cost 50 grand. You need to know the tax impact because that might cost you 70 grand, 75 grand in total, and that's the total cost for the trip after you factor in taxes and where you had to draw the money from in the portfolio.
Yeah, and it goes back to sort of knowing your financial picture, and it's knowing where your assets are in terms of retirement accounts are taxed one way, Roth IRAs are taxed one way, investments are taxed another way. So you really have to understand what the tax impact of your investments are. And when somebody sits down in front of me and they talk about their assets and their spending, you can do a rough calculation, and I usually take a portfolio and multiply it by 4 or 5% to see if that works. But if all that money's in a retirement account, we might have to think about it differently because we're going to have a pretty high tax cost. If the money's in a taxable account, a Roth account, and a retirement account, we might be able to spend a little bit more because we're going to have less tax costs. So those are just some of the ways we think about taxes and spending.
Yeah, I mean taxes should not be a surprise in the planning process when you're thinking about how much you need. I mean, you're thinking about spending in retirement. Is it okay to spend the amount that I'm thinking about? The answer might be yes if you haven't thought about tax, and the answer might be no after you factor taxes in. So you really do have to factor in those assumptions for taxes when you're thinking about spending in retirement. Give yourself that permission to spend in retirement.
Yeah, and so those are sort of the main, I guess, strategies in terms of financial. But one of the biggest ones that I think comes into play is this ability to be flexible and
Hmm.
to make changes as necessary to ensure that your portfolio will last or your assets will last, or that you'll be able to live the life that you want to live. So I think being
Yeah.
flexible is really really important in the equation.
Yeah, it's absolutely essential, and it's situation dependent for everybody. But you think about again that kind of example you gave earlier, where say you're entering into retirement, and markets just really you start hitting some headwinds in markets, and portfolio's not doing so well, and the number that you have for spending that looked really good before markets started working against you. Um, but now when you look at the numbers, portfolios down in value. Now that number doesn't look so great. So that could be an indication that if there's any wiggle room to make adjustments in spending, if you can defer some larger expenses, for example, it could be an opportune time to do that. And that willingness to make adjustments in years where it's indicated, that can really help towards that priority number one objective of making sure your money stands the test of time.
Yeah, it's maybe not even deferring expenses. Like when I think about making changes and being flexible, like let's say you were all set on starting your Social Security at age 70, and
Yeah.
the markets are down, so you may want to let your portfolio gives your portfolio some time to recover. So maybe you decide to take your Social Security at age 67, or maybe you find out you have some sort of health issue. You want to be flexible
Mhm.
and start taking those benefits before. And so sometimes we see that, and that's what we're talking about by being flexible.
Yep, no doubt about it. I mean, you work with the tools that you have in your tool belt, and that's definitely one that we see is flipping on that Social Security income a couple of years before originally planned, because you're making an adjustment that will ultimately strengthen, your overall plan.
Jake, as always, this has been a great conversation. Any way you can list out those priorities or those strategies for me on the spot? Number one,
On the
we didn't
spot,
even talk
identify
about
the
it.
life. Well, identify the life you want to live, right? I mean, you got to think about the how do you want life to look like? What do you want it to be in retirement? There's going to be, um, financial component to that. So
Yeah.
know the life that you want to live. Think about that. Know your financial picture.
Including
Know your budget, including your
including risk.
budget. So, oh,
Well, and
yeah,
I was talking
including
about the
it in.
risk, which you obviously pointed out earlier in the conversation. And then you went on to
Yeah,
know your
know your
budget.
financial picture. Yeah,
Number four.
yeah. No, number four, have the right portfolio.
Number five is
You got
manage
to
your taxes.
manage your taxes.
And
And
number
number
six,
six, we
be
just hit
flexible.
it. Be flexible.
All right, Jake. Well, thank you so much for the great conversation. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. And we always appreciate your feedback. And if you have any other topics that you want us to discuss, just let us know. And we'd be happy to do so. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.